After studying this module, you shall be able to learn the Becker's theory of human capital, analyze the Messerian equation, and lastly, learn about education. Let's look at Becker's theory of human capital. Becker in 1962 defined human capital as the stock of knowledge or characteristics or skill of an individual that contributes to his productivity in the real world. In other words, it is a set of characteristics that influences individuals' future real income. He examined the estimates of human capital by the money rate of return to college and high schools education in the United States. Becker also examined human capital by theoretical and empirical analysis by explaining the rational behavior of an individual human being in the neoclassical economics framework. Let's look at Becker's theory of human capital. The relationship between human capital and economic growth was examined in a succession process by Becker. 1. Education and training of individuals enhances their cognitive capacity. The cognitive capacity increases the productivity of individuals. Third, the earnings of highly educated and skilled individuals would be increased because of their higher productivity. Fourth, this succession process is a measure of human capital. In a nutshell, the succession process of human capital can also be written as higher education leading to expanded cognitive capacity, leading to higher productivity, which leads to higher earnings, and this is a measure of human capital. Before Becker, Schultz also advocated the concept of human capital, and he recognized that although it is obvious that people acquire useful skills and knowledge, it is not obvious that skills and knowledge are a form of capital, that this capital is in substantial part a product of deliberate investment, that it has grown in Western societies at a much faster rate than conventional, that is non-human capital, and that its growth may well be the most distinctive feature of economic system. It has been widely observed that increases in national output have been large compared with the increases of land, man-hours and physical reproducible capital. Investment in human capital is probably the major explanation of the difference. Thus, in 1961, Schultz advocated the process of investment in education as an investment in human capital. Since then, the analogy between the human capital and physical capital in neoclassical economics framework has been continued. This process of human capital is being examined by using the tools and concepts of physical capital of a firm till today. Majumdar and Majumdar also examined the process of human capital as an analogy with physical capital in a neoclassical economics framework. 1. A correspondence between the human capital and physical capital. 2. Expenditure in education is treated as an investment, that is, decision makers of educational investment behave as investors in capital market. Alternatives in education and capital have an analogy. and rational choice of educational investor is same as investors in the capital market. Third, the process of learning or education has an analogy with the process of commodity by a firm, that is input-output analysis. Becker advocated a broader framework on the investment in human capital. In this model, Becker explained the role of investment in human capital and its effect on the determination of income distribution. He examined non-economic and economic variables in determining the personal income distribution, that is, individual cognitive capabilities, family environment, and financing of education. Specifically, Becker focused on why individuals undertake different levels of investment in education in the traditional framework of physical capital of a firm in neoclassical economics. He tried to explain the income differential across countries, regions, and time periods. The crucial aspect to explain income distribution was to examine the prime question of why the rate of return and investment in human capital vary significantly among individuals. The rate of return is the outcome of two factors, demand and supply. On the one side, the demand curve, that is DD, is examined by marginal benefit or rate of return for different levels of investment. On the other side, the supply curve, that is SS, is explained by the marginal cost of financing the investment or rate of interest as shown in figure. Therefore, an individual's DD and SS curve show that how an individual incurs cost in the expectation of getting marginal rate of return or MB. In figure, x-axis show human capital and y-axis depicts the marginal cost and marginal rate of return or benefit. The interaction between demand and supply curves gives an equilibrium point. This point of equilibrium ascertains equality of marginal rate of return and rate of interest for financing education. The demand curve DD is downward sloped because the memory capacity, physical strength, and other features of embodied human capital of an individual are limited. As an individual keeps investing in human capital, eventually diminishing returns would set in. Indispensability of time and universal time constraint faced by a person leads further to the negativity of the DD curve. The supply curve is upward slope because there is an increase in the marginal cost for the production of a rupee of returns as the cost of educational finance rises. There is an increase in the opportunity cost of time for a student as the more hours spent for the study to create more human capital, then simultaneously there is a foregone income from the postponement of jobs. So, increase in human capital would lead to more opportunity cost and marginal cost for the individual. Let us look at Becker's general earning function. Becker also examined the general earning function. He estimated the impact of ability of a worker on earnings or wages with ceteris paribus assumption. Gross earnings of a worker, that is Y, comprises returns on human capital R, which is also linked to the ability of the worker, cost in terms of amount invested, that is C, and earnings, which is not related to the investment on education, that is X, as explained below in the equation 1. Mathematically, Y is equal to X plus R into C. Equation number 1. The changes in average R are estimates of different levels of abilities intrinsic to individual workers' personal distinctiveness. The worker with higher abilities would invest higher in education, which in turn increases their gross earnings. The cost of investment on education by age profile is ignored in the equation 1. Therefore, the next equation 2 includes the age profile of the worker, which estimates net earnings of the worker. Mathematically, Yj is equal to Xo plus sigma I from 0 to j minus 1 into Ri Ci plus within brackets minus Cj, where Sj is the net earning of a worker, Cj is the cost of investment incurred by the worker at her or his young age j, Ci is the cost of investment at age of I, and Ri is the rate of return on the cost investment Ci at age of I by a worker. The equation 2 can be explained graphically also. Figure 2 depicts the cost benefit analysis that median gross annual earnings of a full-time worker in the UK with A level of education was $16,640, which signifies the opportunity cost of getting higher education by a student and postponing her or his job in the labor market. The worker gets higher education from her or his age from 18 to 21 years, and the opportunity cost for 1 year of higher education is $16,640. After 21 years of age, the student becomes a formal worker and can raise her or his earnings as a return or benefits from human capital from investment in higher education. Figure 2 shows the opportunity cost for 4-year degree of higher education at younger age is equal to product of 4 years and $16,640, that is $66,560. The gross earnings in the working age between 21 and 65 years of the worker would be equal to $27,040 and 45 years, that is 1,216,800 or 1.22 billion approximately, and the net earnings of the worker would be the difference between the gross earnings and opportunity cost, that is 1.15 million. Let's look at the application of investment appraisal technique of physical capital to human capital. A rational human who is fully informed of the relevant costs and benefit is in a position to calculate the return from an investment in education, which is analogous to the firm's maximization behavior of rate of return in the case of physical capital investment. Thus, the analogy of a firm's investment decision appraisal techniques of net present value and internal rate of return are applied in the case of rational human's investment decision in education, that is human capital. In the case of optional period E of education, the relevant comparison in NPV terms is between sigma T to 1 to TE WE minus WE minus 1 over 1 plus I to the power of T and WE minus 1 plus CE. That is equation number 3, where the expression 3 represents present value of higher expected earnings for an individual. WE and WE minus 1 are earnings from the E level of education and loss of earnings in the past period, that is E minus 1. If WE is greater than WE minus 1 because of an individual worker puts extra period of education over one's working life, that is T minus E. In a perfect capital market, the rate of interest I would be the correct rate to take into account of an individual's time preference and opportunity cost of this investment as opposed to the other. The total cost of education is as donated by WE minus 1 and CE, which are opportunity costs in terms of foregone income or wages in the time of education and the direct cost. The investment in education would be beneficial for an individual if the present value of earnings is higher than the total cost of education. Another method of analysis for investment appraisal in education is to calculate internal rate of return, that is R, and its comparison with the market rate of interest, that is I. The main point of this cost benefit method is to equate the present value of earnings and total cost for finding the value of R. The investment in education would be beneficial if the internal rate of return, that is R, is higher than the market rate of interest. Mincerian equation. Mincerian-Wade equation for estimation of rate of return on investment of education. Investment in education is a determinant of income or wage, which is also a cause of income differential and wage differential among workers. Mincer used different variables in empirical equations to define the relationship between investment of education and earnings of the workers. The first equation is WT is equal to WT minus 1 plus R WT minus 1, where WT is the annual earnings for a worker after 1 year of schooling and are equal to WT minus 1, which is annual earning with T minus 1 year schooling plus the cost of education, that is CT is equal to WT minus 1 times the rate of return on investment of education RT. With the use of law of mathematical induction, earnings of worker after S years of schooling is equal to WS is equal to WO pi T is equal to 1 to S into 1 plus RT within bracket, that is equation 2. After taking natural logarithms and applying the approximation for small values of R, log 1 plus R is approximately equal to R 2 yields. Log WT is equal to log W0 plus sigma T1 to S RT, that is equation number 3. For R is equal to RT being constant across the levels of schooling is equal to log WT is equal to log WO plus RS. or equation 4 can be written as Wt is equal to Wo into 1 plus R to the power of S. Therefore, equation 4 is a logarithmic version of equation 5. The relationship between earnings of workers and investment made by them in education measured in monetary units, and this relationship can be converted to the relationship as in equation 1, where natural logarithms of earnings and investment in education measured are in time units. Logarithms of earnings is a linear function of years of schooling. The interpretation that each additional year of schooling increases earnings by R% is made possible by the log linear transformation of the wage function. Mincer had empirically estimated the rate of return from education across countries with a control variable of work experience of the workers. Mincer also influenced many empirical studies to estimate the wage equation in the context of role of education in the determination of wages in the labor market, and the empirical analysis is examined through regression analysis. Let's look at the criticism of Mincerian wage equation for estimation of rate of return on investment of education. There are also criticism of Mincerian wage equation for the estimation of rate of return on investment of education. First criticism was related to the cost of education as Ct is equal to Wt minus 1, because there are no inclusions of direct private investment and public cost of education like subsidies allocated by the government to the educational institutions, student tuition fees, books, stationery and private coaching. Second criticism was related to the exclusion of age profile of workers for different levels of education in the wage equation and regression. Third criticism was the proxy variable used for human capital as average years of schooling or education. The reasons for the criticism of the proxy variable of human capital are explained by Woosman in 2003. 1. An increase in the years of schooling by 1 year do not mean that will lead to accurately one addition of human capital, as there are different levels of education, that is primary, secondary and tertiary education. There are also different types of tertiary education like general, vocational, technical and professional education. And 2. Heterogeneity in the quality of education prevails at the levels and types of education. The homogeneity of human capital in terms of level of education is treated by Mincer, and ignoring the heterogeneity of the quantity and quality of education, which is resulted as an unbiased estimator of the rate of return of investment of education. Let's look at the alternatives to the criticism of Mincerian wage equation by different economists. Sharpoulos provided an alternative to the first criticism of Mincerian wage equation explained above. The alternative is just the modification of the Mincerian wage equation explained as below in the semi-log regression. Log Wi is equal to beta 0 plus beta 1 Si plus beta 2 xi plus beta 3 xi to the power of 2 plus ei, where log Wi is a natural logarithm of earnings or wages of a worker I. Si is the number of years of schooling or education of a worker I. Xpi is the number of years of work experience of a worker I. Xpi to the power of 2 is the square of work experience of a worker I, and EI is a error term of regression. The coefficient of SI is the estimator beta 1, which estimates the rate of return on investment of education for a worker. The coefficient of Xpi is the estimator beta 2, which estimates the effect of work experience on the change in wage of a worker. The coefficient of Xi to the power of 2 is the estimator beta 3, which estimates the effect of change in the work experience on wage of a worker. Wage is assumed to rise with a gain in the work experience, but with a decreasing rate. In other words, the reason for including square of work experience in the regression is to estimate the decreasing rate of increase in the wage or earnings of a worker with an increase in experience. Mincer estimated a value of beta 1 is equal to 0.107 using data from US Census 1960. Scarpulus and Laird estimated the value of beta 1 is equal to 0.097 for England and Wales by using the data of the census 1972. These two empirical findings suggested that the average rate of return for a year of schooling in the US and UK was about 10% or more, approximately 10.7% in US during 1960 and 9.7% in UK during 1972. The general picture is one of decreasing average rates of return on education in the US between 1900 and 1940. The rate of return to higher education in the US appeared to be roughly constant between 1939 and 1969 in the 30-year period. The rate of return on higher education in 1939 and 1969 were 10.7% and 10.9% respectively. However, there was a reduction in the return to the higher education during the 1970s as Scarpulus estimated that private rate of return to university education had declined to only 5.3% in the US. Freeman in 1977 examined that there are two reasons for reduction in returns to higher education. One was the rise in cost of US college education or tuition fees during the decade of 1970s. Another reason for the decline in the return of higher education was higher growth rate of labor force in the US during 1970s. The higher US labor force growth rate in the 1970s was due to the effect of the baby boom period of the US in the decade 1960s. These two reasons have also adversely affected the wage premium to the higher education in the US labor market and led to the reduction in the wage premium in the US during 1970s. However, the rate of return to the US higher education in early 80s had an upward trend. In the case of British labor market, during the period 1978 to 1999, first, the real wage of both men and women full-time workers in the age of 18 years had increased and then had a dip in the age group of 19 to 21 years. This dip is between the normal age at which British students will finish A levels, which are the usual university entrance qualifications, and the completion of a first bachelor's degree at the university level. Thereafter, real wages had risen until leaving full-time education by the age of 24 years, which allows for the completion of a master's degree at the university level of education. Although there is a positive return to experience, it is not a substantial one. Incorporating age as a quadratic xi to the power of 2, Hammer and Walker estimated the rates of return to the UK education, which were 8% for men and 11% for women. Using another type of method to estimate the impact of experience, that is actual age minus education leaving age, that is potential experience, and actual experience, that is the number of years worked since leaving education, had less effect on the impact of education producing returns of about 9.5% for men and 12% for women. So, although experience is satisfactorily significant in the multiple regressions, its effect on rates of return to education are not substantial. Exactly the same can be said for other variables, including trade union membership, plant size of the company or firm, part-time working of the workers, marital status of the workers, and the size of the family. Let's look at the international returns to education, percentage wise in 1995 for different countries. For Austria, for males it was 3.6 and for females 6.2. For Czech Republic it was 2.9 and 4.5. For Germany West 3.5 and 4.4. Germany East 2.7 and 4.5. Hungary 7.0 and 7.2. Italy 4.0 and 5.7. Ireland 10.2 and 11.6. Netherlands 3.3 and 1.8. Norway 2.3 and 2.7. Poland 7.4 and 10.3. Russia 4.2 and 5.6. Slovakia 5.0 and 6.4. Slovenia 8.9 and 11.2. Spain 5.2 and 4.7. Sweden 3.7 and 4.2. Switzerland 4.3 and 5.2. Great Britain 13.0 and 14.7. Northern Ireland 17.7 and 16.8. Australia 5.1 and 5.7. Canada 3.7 and 5.0. New Zealand 4.2 and 3.8. Japan 7.5 and 9.2. And US 7.8 and 9.8. With the help of table 1, an analysis of international returns to education percent-wide in the year 1995 is undertaken for different countries. The highest rate of return have been gained by the UK or Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and they also approach to the Republic of Ireland. The rates of return to education for males in Great Britain, Northern Ireland and Ireland were 13.0%, 17.7% and 10.2% respectively in 1995. The respective rates for females in these countries were also in double digits, 14.7%, 16.8% and 11.6% in the same year. The double digit rate of return for females were also attained by Poland, that is 10.3%, and Slovenia 11.2%. Thus, female rates of return are higher than the male rate of return in 1995 with the exception of Netherlands, Spain, Northern Ireland and New Zealand. The rate of return on the Scandinavian countries and the Netherlands are low. The rates in some former communist countries of Eastern Europe, that is Hungary, Poland, Slovakia and Slovenia, are quite high, whereas those in Russia itself and the Czech Republic are more modest. Although the rates in the UK are high by international standards in 1995, they have fallen since the late 1970s. By 1995, rate of return in Australia are nowhere near as high as those in the UK. Although the extent varies, state involvement in education or public funding is a universal phenomenon. Thus, in itself, a strong indication that there may be important social aspects of education process. From labor economics perspective, there are externalities which ensure that the effect of education are not confined to the individual human capital investor. There are social costs and benefits connected with education as a knowledge industry. If the social benefits to education are higher than the private benefits to individual, then there is an economic rationale for public funding in the provision of education. This perspective of private and social benefit from education is examined. There is a given amount of education, that is EP, that would be provided if we only considered the private costs and benefits. However, if we consider social benefits, the optimum level of education would be higher at ES, and higher public funding is required for the provision of education in the economy and in the society at larger scale. The examples of social benefit from education are higher economic growth, promotion of social tolerance and cohesions for multiculturalism and cosmopolitan culture in the society, strengthening democratic values, expanding upward social mobility and higher tax revenues from the highly educated and skilled people in the economy. There could be a positive complementarity between the higher productivity of high skilled workers and low skilled workers, which is guided by the highly educated people in the labor market through on the job training. These types of benefits may then set against a group of social costs, including direct costs of education, provisions at compulsory and higher levels, cost of subsidizing students and possible discontent from raising expectations. After the identification of the social costs and benefits, it is possible to estimate the social rate of return to education. Because of the enormous direct cost of education, that is building of colleges, universities, schools, books and teaching and non-teaching staffs, the estimates of the social rate of return are significantly lower than those of private returns. The scenario that emerged from comparisons is that rates of return tend to be greater the less developed the economy. The economy and that returns tend to decline with increasing levels of education. To confirm that rates of return decline as the level of education increases, the average of private and social rates of return in percentage to full-time study in England, Wales for the year 1987 were 9.0% for A level of education, 12.5% for bachelor level of education and 3.0% for master's degree of education and 2.5% for doctorate level of education. However, there is a debate on the estimation of these rates for developed and developing economies. The variation in rates of return on investment in education for the workers, which cannot be observed, is probably the main component of residual variations in these regression leads to biased estimation. The correlation between these rates of return and the quantity of schooling investment across workers is evidently weak. If so, the assumption of independence between R or beta 1 to the power of 1 and S across workers can be used and provide a way of estimating upper limits for the dispersion of workers' rate of return on education or schooling. Sigma square within bracket R or beta 1. In this case, the inequality in earnings or wages of worker I can be estimated by another modified regression in the variance form as explained below. That is, sigma square into log Wi is equal to R bar square sigma square within bracket S plus S bar square sigma square within bracket R plus sigma square S sigma square R plus sigma square V, where sigma square log Wi is a variance of log Wi. It implies that inequality in earnings or wages is explained by I, that is the variance in schooling, which is captured by the S bar square sigma square within bracket R and variance of rate of return on schooling or education is R bar square sigma square S, and the product of both the variances of rate of return and schooling. The variance of V, which is the variance of the residual V due to other unmeasured factors of change in earnings of the worker I. Harman and Walker cited studies which estimated the social rates of return to the UK male graduates by degree subject of 0% for humanities and biological sciences and 11% plus for medicine, science, computing, business studies and social studies. After examining all these estimates of the rates of return to education, it can be inferred that there is a positive relation between earnings of the workers and level of education attained by the workers. This positive correlation in the UK labour market is also examined by table 2. Usual gross weekly earnings in terms of pounds for all UK employees in 2000. No qualification, the earnings were 200. GCSE grade A to C 240, A level 320, sub degree higher 390, degree 520. Thus, human capital theory including Mincerian equation explains the earnings differentials as justified by differential productivity resulting from different human capital investment. Therefore, human capital theory including Mincerian equation has theoretically and empirically examined the positive correlation between education and earnings, or education enhances productivity of labor, which in turn increases the earnings of the workers, which eventually create earnings differential between workers. Over-education. The proportion of 15-year-old youths in England gaining class standard 5 or more GCSE, that is basic school leaving qualification at grade A to C, increased from 35% in 1989-90 to 44% in 94-95 to 48% in 1998-99. The proportion of 16 and 17-year-olds who stayed on to undergo some form of education or training also rose from 66% in 1985 to 77% in 1990 to 83% in 1995, then fell to 82% in 1998. There was a rise in the stock of qualified in the UK across various age cohorts from 1937 to 1971. There has been a dramatic collapse in the proportion of younger workers with no qualification. This has been accompanied by a marked rise in the proportion of younger workers with a first degree from university. This is set to increase further as about 30% of the cohort enters university in the early 2000s. Against the background of the expansion of higher education and subsidies for university students, the concept of over-education has received attention in recent years. The key problem is to address is that whether some workers who have over-invested in gaining educational qualifications are not particularly productive either for themselves or the nation. Given the increase in the supply of educated workers, unless demand keeps pace with the supply, over-education will emerge. Before we examine the scale of over-education, we require few definitions. Now, what is over-education? This occurs when individual workers are in jobs either temporarily or permanently that underutilize their skills or education. Being over-educated will lower the rate of return to education. It cannot exist if labor markets are fully efficient and equate wages with marginal revenue productivity. Therefore, education requires some rigidity in the labor market, some labor market mismatch or imperfect information which could cause or arise from an excess stock of human capital or job search inefficiencies. Undereducation. This is the opposite situation where individual workers are in jobs for which they have insufficient education. Undereducation might come about if there is a shortage of adequately qualified workers or if workers find themselves in a job whose required education rises over time. In the case of older workers, they may be substituting experience for a lack of education. Undereducation will exaggerate the rate of return to education. Qualification inflation. This refers to the process whereby employers increase the required qualification level of a particular job. In the signaling or screening, we rely on the cost of acquiring education being lower for higher ability workers. If learning costs fall, for example, by allowing easier access to university education, then lower ability workers invest more in education, which pushes up the average education of young workers. If the firms begin to find that a certain qualification no longer bring workers of the right ability, then they will upgrade their educational requirements. Grade drift. This refers to the deterioration of educational standards. If the standard of GCSE levels are falling, enabling a greater proportion of an age cohort to pass the exam, then the employers will seek workers with A levels in the UK. If there is a dumbing down of undergraduate education, then employers will seek workers with master's degree. When it comes to gauging the magnitude of overeducation, the first point to note is that there has been no fall in rate of returns to education, implying that while the supply of qualified workers has undoubtedly increased, so has the demand for qualified workers. Indeed, in the UK, the wage markup for graduates over those with no qualification has risen from 1.93 in 1985 to 2.32 in 1995. Along with this increasing wage inequality between education levels has come increased inequality within education levels, which is defined as heterogeneity. Such type of heterogeneity can be increased due to the following reasons. First, there is a grade drift caused by greater variations in the quality of education. Second, there can also be a decline in trade union power, increasing the inequality of earning due to decline in the bargaining power of the trade union. Third, there can also be greater labor market mismatch as rising proportion of overeducated workers getting lower wages than their better matched peers. Groot in 1996 estimated that the overeducation rates of British male workers were between 13% and 15% in the British labour market. The overeducation rate of the British female workers was between 8% and 10%. Green et al. Estimated that overeducation rates among graduates in the UK labour market increased from 30% in 1986 to 32% in 1997. This suggests that contrary to human capital theory, overeducation is not a temporary phenomenon. Yet, could overeducation be fairly permanent feature of the labour market but temporary for the individuals? Data on 1980 graduates reported by Green et al. Showed that the majority of the overeducated male graduates had not moved into graduate jobs within 6 years. The estimates of undereducation indicated that it is much less of a problem. Data from a 1998 Newcastle University alumni survey of 2,200 graduates resulted in 46% claiming to be overeducated, with only 10% reporting to be undereducated. There was no evidence of qualification inflation. Let us summarize. This module has examined three crucial concepts related to the investment in education. That is, 1. Becker's theory of human capital, 2. Mincerian equation of human capital, and 3. Overeducation in terms of wastage of human capital. Human capital theory of Schultz and Becker and Mincerian equation explain the earning differentials, which are effects of productivity differentials of the workers. These differentials are resulted from different levels of human capital investment of the students and their families. Therefore, human capital theory, including Mincerian equation, has theoretically and empirically examined the positive correlation between education and earnings, or education enhances productivity of labor, which in turn increases the earnings of the workers, which eventually creates earnings differential between workers. Becker in 1962 defined human capital as the stock of knowledge or characteristics or skill an individual has that contributes to his productivity in the real world. In other words, it is a set of characteristics that influences individual's future real income. he examined the estimates of human capital by the money rate of return to college and high school education in the United States. Before Becker, Schultz also advocated the process of investment in education as an investment in human capital. Since then, the analogy between human capital and physical capital in neoclassical economics framework had been continued. This process of human capital is being examined by using the tools and concepts of physical capital of a firm till today. Mincer had empirically estimated the rate of return from education across countries with a control variable of work experience of the worker. Mincer also influenced many empirical studies to estimate the wage equation in the context of role of education in the determination of wages in labor market, and the empirical analysis is examined through regression analysis. The last topic has been covered in this module is overeducation. The example of overeducation in the times of higher graduate unemployment in the developing economies like India, the PhD holders are working as peons in the Indian state Uttar Pradesh. If the investment in education of students is not adequately used in the labor market because of wrong use of knowledge and skill, then it would lead to wastage of human capital.